Welcome to the Climate Hive Show. What do you solve? I'm Kevin Drolet, aka Kedro, and I'm here with my co-founder, co-host, Mike Higgins, aka Higo. We have an amazing guest today who is doing very important work, and we can't wait to dig right into that. Daniel Cardozo is a driving force in ethical merchandising, leading the change in sweatshop-free, union-made, and fair trade apparel. As CEO, he is committed to proving that businesses can thrive without compromising on labor rights or sustainability. And with a vision rooted in fairness and quality, Daniel ensures that every product reflects a deeper commitment to ethical production and social responsibility. So, Daniel's CEO, as I said, of Ethix merchandise. And just to give you a flavor of Ethix merchandise, in a world of branded products, there's so much stuff is created without concern for labor conditions or the environment. Mm-hmm. Ethix wants to change all that. So that's what we're going to be digging into and learning about today. I did want to give you a quick background on some where Daniel's come from because it's interesting. So in 2001, Ben Cohen, co-founder of Ben & Jerry's, sought to create a socially responsible apparel company. And backed by Cohen's venture fund, SweatX was formed in 2002 with a goal of raising awareness of garment shop working conditions and demonstrating the viability of fair wages. Through SweatX, though SweatX closed in 2004, it inspired three former leaders to establish a new company with a new vision. And Ethix Merch was born in 2007. And they hired Daniel Cardozo, who eventually became the CEO. And as an activist CEO, Daniel champions Ethix Merch's mission to connect socially responsible organizations with ethically sourced merchandise from sweatshop-free, union-made, fair trade, and eco-friendly suppliers. So that's a lot, but Daniel, you're doing a lot, and we're super excited. So I'm going to hand it over to Higo to kick off the show. Thanks so much for joining us, Daniel.
Oh, it's awesome to be here with you guys. Looking forward to it.
Us too, Daniel. Us too, for sure. You know that I know Ethix Merch is your activism now. You and your teams and phenomenal. You know, I wanted to ask a two-part question today, shake it up a little bit, and hear more about your road to the CEO role inside of Ethix Merch, because I think there was a lot there, Ethix Merch. You know, I'd love to hear a little bit more of that landed you in there, you know, and said, this is the right place to put the energy that I have against this problem that I see. You know, and then secondarily is, you know, really helping us wrap our minds around that the core issue that your product or service is focused on eradicating, you know. So because you guys got a lot going on. We've bought merchandise from you. It's great. So I just love to let everyone have an opportunity to get to know you better leading up to this role and then the mission of this business.
Yeah, for sure. I'll spend a little bit less time on the first part of your question. I don't know how interesting my background is, honestly. Like, I grew up middle class, Jewish in Southern California. No particular head on my shoulders, no particular vision for my future. Went to school, got a degree in English. So, of course, naturally, I'm not doing anything with my English degree in particular. I guess it helps.
What?
I guess it helps with writing emails. That's about it. But I guess when it clicked for me with the labor rights activism was doing anti-sweatshop work. I think the whole kind of thing started to shake out around the time I was a college grad, with the whole apparel industry moving outside the United States. Globalization took over. People who are my age and older will remember Kathy Lee Gifford got in big trouble for her line of apparel that came out in Walmart. And there was all kinds of nefarious practices happening in that subcontracted facility that she was using over there without any of her personal knowledge, of course. But big tears on live camera. And this sort of started the awakening nationally around the anti-sweatshop movement. So I was paying attention around that time, trying to figure out what to do with myself and how to make an impact on the world. And I started poking around, doing some labor activist work, doing some anti-sweatshop work, educating local communities within the Jewish community around how to avoid the worst of the worst anti-sweatshop abuses. And then at one of these national meetings where the anti-sweatshop community came together to discuss what to do about this big problem of subcontracted facilities and not knowing what the heck was happening, and the big sucking sound of all of those manufacturing jobs leaving the United States back then, to the point where now only 2% of the apparel sold in the United States was made in the United States. But back in the 60s and 70s, that was kind of reversed. The vast majority was made here in the United States. So at one of these events, I met the CEO of Ethix Merch, which was just getting started. And, we were chatting. I was borrowing a pencil from this guy. I didn't know him before. And he was like, so what are you doing? I started telling him about my activist work, you know, uh, getting Nike to pay back wages to workers who were experiencing wage theft, all these sorts of things, boycotts. And he's like, have you ever tried working through business? That's what we're doing. I'm like, no, definitely not. Like, I was a Berkeley grad, I was an English major, being in business was the farthest thing from my head. But Kevin O'Brien, the CEO of Ethix at the time, was like, think about it. You're trying to get organizations and individuals to move their purchasing away from Nike and Gap and Reebok and Forever 21. Where are these folks going to go? They're just going to move to one of the other ones, right? And so where are you directing people that are doing things the right way? And I was like, I don't know. So he's like, come on board with us. Pretty much offered me a job right there on the spot and be a part of a business-oriented solution to the problem of sweatshops. And that's how it got started. So I guess it wasn't that short.
Let me ask you one question on that because I can't let it go. You said you were borrowing a pencil from him. Is that, I mean, really? Seriously?
Yeah, I mean,
You're
that's
like, hey,
typical Daniel. Like, anyone listening out there who wants to be a CEO, you can also be scatterbrained and come to a meeting without a pencil or a pen or anything to
that's
write.
so funny, man.
So yeah, he was
Okay.
just sitting there and I was like tapping him on the shoulder. Do you have a pencil? And that's how it got started.
It's awesome.
Um,
How long did it take before you ended up becoming the CEO of the company? What was that?
well, it was just Kevin and I and the other two owners that you mentioned at the outset are kind of like strategic board members. They weren't doing the day-to-day. So it was just me and him for a while. We added another few people, eventually grew to a staff of about 10 or 11 before Kevin moved on to do something else in 2016. So it was about 9 years before it's all up to me now.
So to Mike's second part of his question,
Yeah.
and it's sort of the show, what do you solve? But we are really interested, like what's the core thing that you're really trying to, all your energies are going to that you feel like you're solving with Ethix merch?
Yeah. Yeah. So the core thing has shifted. At the beginning, the core thing was almost 100% about labor rights. Like, we've
Mhm.
lost control as a society over where our stuff is made, an increasingly large amount of stuff. And we're getting all these reports back from these far off scattered places where the manufacturing is happening. And the reports are coming back with, nothing but inequality and misery and exploitation. So the goal at the beginning was to find the places where manufacturing was happening ethically. And typically we would use a union standard. So union made in USA. That was the easiest way for us to guarantee that these folks weren't being exploited. The trick was really worker voice. Where can you actually go and talk to the workers and verify directly that they're not being exploited, right? And so the way we're solving that problem is just meeting with clients, trying to get the word out there. Where are you currently sourcing your merchandise? Do you know the risks associated with this purchase? And would you be willing to invest over here in this area where the worker guarantees are stronger? And over time, as you guys know very well, sustainability has become a global mega crisis. And so that has had to become a second branch of what we do here at Ethix. It's not just about labor. It's not just about the environment. It's really about both. So, but when you get to the core issue of what makes us different and what we're trying to solve, I would say that it's maybe flipping the idea of the customer is always right. And I'll tell you why. Because the customer is essentially choosing based on their own self-interest. And that's true on the individual level, and it's true at the institutional organizational level. And the proof of that is we have increasing inequality in the world, and we have increasing environmental catastrophe in the world. This is not throwing shade on individuals and their decision making necessarily. Like, we're all guilty of it, you know? I'm gonna
Yeah.
go after this podcast, I'm probably gonna go on Amazon and order something because it's convenient, right? The trick is we can't solve these problems without consumers making better choices, but nobody's asking those consumers to make better choices. We're all just doing what we do and nobody's bothering us about it. So if I had to really boil down what ethics is, it's like we're an annoying like conscience on your shoulder saying like, oh, so you want something that's eco-friendly and you want something that's labor-friendly. Fantastic, we can help you. Oh, wait, you don't want to pay any more for it than you're already paying for your like unsustainable imported products? Sorry, that's not going to happen. And here's why, and here's some stories about your risks. Here's some great stories about the really awesome merchandise that you can get that is ethical and sustainable. So you can feel better about making that choice to spend more money, which nobody wants to do. So yeah, I would say it's pretty rare in our industry to have promotional products distributors say like, have you thought about purchasing less stuff? Like, and just so that you can spend more money on the good stuff, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
You know, you're hitting on, especially on Amazon, with this whole idea of least cost providers, right? So if I go on Amazon to buy a whatever shirt, sweatshirt, whatever, how do I know what's behind the manufacture of that garment? I mean, how do I have any chance at all of becoming educated, assuming I decided I wanted to be, right? Ignorance can be a little bliss, right?
Mhm.
Like I live in Colorado, the middle of winter, I can walk into a supermarket and buy bananas. You know, they're not grown in Colorado. They're, I have no idea where they're grown. I have no idea, you know, any of the things behind that fruit getting into that supermarket, right? I just know what it costs. I have no idea what the downstream looks like.
Yeah. I mean, there are some tips. I would say the biggest thing is common sense, you know? If you're walking into a store or if you're logging onto a website and you see something and you're like, that's actually a pretty good deal. That's a red flag for me. Like, why
Hmm.
why is it a good deal? Who's paying the costs that you're not paying on for workers in the environment? For example, a t-shirt. You go onto Amazon, you want to buy a t-shirt for $9.99 that has a really cool full color digital print. Start to think about what goes into that, you know? There's cotton that needs to be grown for that shirt, or there's polyester that has to be made. That's got to be ginned, it's got to be spun, it's got to be made into fabric, fabric's got to be cut and sewn, all of those, that's a person touching that shirt, every single part of that journey. It's got to be dyed, and then it's got to be printed, right? So and then compare that to what is the minimum wage, you know? Let's say you're in California. The minimum wage here is around $16, $17. You start to add that up, and it can't possibly be a t-shirt for $9.99. And that should tell you like to start asking some of the questions. And then you get into really muddy waters. How do you guarantee that you're doing right with your like really awesome deal that you want to get? First of all, like I just said, I'm skeptical. But second of all, if you start asking questions, it really comes down to the details of what those certifications are. So you might hear FLA certification or RAP certification. And to me, I've been researching this for many years. What I hear is like, oh, there's corporations on the board of those organizations. So, and they're only investigating a small percentage of factories, and those factories don't have unannounced visits from auditors. And they're in garment producing countries that have a really low minimum wage anyway, that's not even close to your living wage for workers. And so I might need to start asking additional questions after that. So I say, like, to heck with that whole conversation. And instead of asking yourself, what are the guarantees I have for the item I want to buy? Um, how about starting from the reverse angle and saying, where do I know that I already have a guarantee? And then can I change my own needs to fit into what I know is ethical? And those are the really hard decisions that have to be made. Like, uh, I just discovered that I've been walking around with a pair of shorts that has a hole in the sort of groin crotch area. So I'm like, okay, I'll just go back to Target and get another one of these, that'll probably wear out again in a few weeks, but then I'll just get another one. They're like $15, right? But then I have to stop myself and I have to think,
Right.
who are the human beings attached to this pair of shorts? How are they being treated? And then so now I have to remind myself to go and search for bona fide ethical stuff. And the first clue is going to be that price.
It's interesting, this question of people being prepared. So if you prepare ahead of time, I was talking with Mike about this, but like if you prepare ahead of time in life, right, you end up paying less. So that's true for everything, right? Like if you do the research beforehand, anything you do, and a lot of merchandise, like I was just at a solar trade show, and there's just so much stuff. People just come and they have so much stuff, and it's marketing, and they're kind of just giving this stuff away and everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of it ends up, it's just trash. It's money spent, it's energy spent, and I know, that for a lot of these companies, it's also like a last minute decision, right? It's like, well, 2 weeks before the show, we got to get all this merchandise in last minute, and they're ordering this stuff. And that process, that last minute decision making creates a lot of waste. I mean, that drives like a lot of waste for environmental destruction, for poor labor practices, along with, of course, the price question. People like, I got to get it the fastest, the cheapest. And so my question to you is about behavioral change, and you're speaking to it, but it seems very difficult to get people to change their behaviors. And I would just love to get your insights on it, or where do you feel like you guys have won, and how have you won? How have you made, some advances on that front?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about
Mm.
behavior. Uh, I tear my hair out when I get a new customer coming in. They want to do the right thing. I tell them what I think the guarantees are. Here's this product was produced within a 700-mile radius from the cotton all the way to the print, to the water-based print. This is a fantastic t-shirt for you. They're like, awesome, let's do it. My event's in 2 months. Fantastic. Do you have your design ready? No, but we'll get to it. I think I should have it tomorrow. 3 weeks go by. I'm checking in. Oh, we almost have it. Then by the time they're ready to place the order, I can't give TS Designs, this awesome, ethical, sustainable t-shirt maker, enough time to do what they do because they're not, custom ink. They don't have a million t-shirts lying on the shelf that they can just pull off and print and ship out. People need to adjust their expectations. You're absolutely right. How to make that happen? We need to have time for relationship building and conversations and trust building. And so, as the owner of a small business, it's hard to make time for those conversations, like to really indicate to people the importance, to tell the story of those specific workers, to tell them about the risks, to send them a Human Rights Watch report on the labor conditions in Bangladesh, and have them read it and talk about it. That's the kind of thing that has to sink in. So how do I get that time as a CEO to outreach and have those conversations? Well, we need to build money for that. And the way that we raise money is through the true believers, the people who we don't have to educate. They already want to do this. And if enough of those come together, then we can have the financial wherewithal to have, an activist CEO and a couple of other folks go around and do that education with people who aren't quite there yet. So we do have some of those customers. Climate Town comes to mind, a really fantastic group of performers. There's this guy, Raleigh, who's a comedian / climate scientist, and he does YouTube videos about climate. And he's got about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube and a big old following. His videos on climate are hilarious. So they come to me, and I feel like I'm being interviewed about whether we can hit their environmental standards. They're asking all the tough questions, and I have to say, this is awesome. Let me actually get back to you on what I can dig up that's better than what we're offering. So they ended up doing that TS design shirt with the 700-mile radius that I talked about. And they're saying, well, okay, you got me on the 700 miles and the fact that the cotton in North Carolina isn't irrigated because you don't need to irrigate cotton in North Carolina, so it saves water, which is one of the problems with cotton. Got me on that. What about the dye? And so I'm like, well, that's one part of the process that's not solved yet. It's normal chemical dye. And they're like, well, yeah, we can't find anything better, so let's go with this. But in the future, let's work on a natural dye for that part of the. So these are the folks that are gonna help us get to the next level of storytelling and education is when people ask those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I can see it. I would imagine that is not how it usually goes for you, where they're driving you so hard, right? Because they know what they want, right? They know they
Yeah.
expect a very specific thing, and it's phenomenal that you were able to become that partner, though. That's great. What a testament.
Yeah. Honestly, like you're completely right in terms of what the typical is. You could
Yeah.
I could say like people want a custom printed mouse. Okay, here's a mouse. And I'd say you can see this is made of, super sustainable plastic that is, made from oil in like an artisanal zone of Brazil. And it's reusable. So you don't have to buy a new mouse every day. Whatever BS, right? And they'd be like,
Yeah.
okay, you're saying it's eco-friendly, right? Check, box checked.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true that the greenwash is real, right? Like the
The greenwash
greenwash
is
is
very real.
it's
Yeah.
real. And then it's weird too, because people, people believe the stories they tell themselves, right? So it's like, yeah, it's eco-friendly. I feel good about it. It was cheaper, but it's not true. But that's
Right.
a problem.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask because, you know, in the renewable energy space, and one of the things that I think is exciting about climate is that in the renewable energy space, the energy actually is becoming cheaper than like fossil fuels and these kinds of things, right? I mean, we have a ways to go, but the energy is actually now cheaper. And I'm wondering, at some point, do you think that, ethical merchandise that's friendly to the environment can actually be, like at a lower cost than the stuff that's mass produced?
I love this question. Let's geek out about it. So, um, where is renewable energy most available?
In the sunny places,
Right. But also in
windy,
the industrialized places, right?
right? The global north, yeah.
The global north. But the manufacturing is happening in the global south, right? So this is the biggest issue right now on matching up renewable energy sources for textile production with with the actual manufacturing, right? But you're absolutely right to say that I think it is on the horizon. Now, the labor costs are so dramatically opposed to each other that you could pay less for energy if you're paying marginally less for renewable energy at this point, I believe, in than you are for fossil fuels, right? So it's not enough to overcome the discrepancy in labor. But that could change. It could change for a bad reason or it could change for a good reason. It changed for a bad reason because in order to compete, global north manufacturing plummets, the labor protections disappear, and the wages for workers here in the United States start to meet up with those in China and Bangladesh and Indonesia and Honduras, just to stay competitive. So that's the bad way. The good way is if we get these um, ethical consumers get a movement going and amass more purchasing power so that the global apparel brands have to raise wages in those garment producing countries. And that's another way to shrink it. You start putting that together with decreasing renewable energy costs that those countries can invest in. Like Bangladesh makes so much apparel. If they had a way to reduce their energy costs for making that apparel, they would jump on it. So I think it will inevitably happen, what you're talking about. It's just a question of how it happens and whether workers are brought along for the ride in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. We have a good friend in Bangladesh who has a organization called Climate Innovation Challenge, by the way, which I'll have to connect you. Wahid
Yeah, I saw that
saying,
podcast. It was great.
yeah. So yeah, he's they're doing great stuff, but I mean that's we have to connect people. I think people have to connect and be talking to each other in these
Mhm.
all
Yeah.
around. But
Bangladesh is a great case study. Like, there's been so much amazing garment worker activism that's happened there since the Rana Plaza disaster in 2014 that killed 1,100 workers because there were no building safety protections in place. But since then, a lot of amazing work has been done to increase the safety standards there in Bangladesh for garment workers, which were just terrible.
Mm.
So the same thing kind of has to happen on the other elements of worker protections, including, wages. Um, that piece of it is still missing over there in Bangladesh, but
yeah,
and that's a big piece.
So in terms of getting the word out, you're a business, obviously. You have a product, products. What are you looking for when you're out, prospecting? Is it, companies of X size that take ESG reports seriously, right? So you're sort of saying, okay, maybe these guys care more, see if they're put their money where their mouth is. I mean, what are you doing to, develop ideal customer profiles, if you will, and get the word out about, that you provide these services, these products, and they should be sourced via you.
Yeah, I hate ESG reports.
You do?
Yeah, I
Because
really
they're
do.
not sincere. I mean, why?
So I think it's a major problem in our industry. As you get bigger as a supplier of promotional products, we're a distributor of promotional products. As you get bigger as a supplier, or even as a really large distributor, then the onus becomes on you to prove your ESG, and your sourcing bona fides. And the end goal, as I've seen it too often, is like to get that certification. And you are spending a lot of time on disclosure of your supply chain, on supply chain transparency. And these things are already getting you halfway up the mountain toward that certification, is just disclosing. And that takes so much work to find out where all of those layers of the supply chain are hidden. But that doesn't even talk about the ethics or sustainability of it. That's just the
Hmm.
transparency side. Once you get into the certification side of ESG, and I think it's a little bit further along, honestly, in sustainability than it is on labor rights. But once you get into the verification, there are all sorts of loopholes at that when it comes to getting that. For example, you might get a score of 99 on transparency from one of these certifications, and a score of 42 on sustainability, and a score of 12 on labor rights. And that's all averaging out to about 60. And what do you know? You're in the top 90% of promotional product suppliers on your
Hmm.
grade. So I think there's just a ton of work going on how to get that badge. And that time really needs to be spent on proving your outcomes. Uh, so that's why I don't like ESG in its current state. But to get back to your question of what do I look for? What I'm looking for is a commitment to worker voice on the labor side. So I don't want to hear that you have a certification that indicated that some paid auditors went to the factory and reported that there were no violations. What I want is a bona fide worker organization that is independent, that's not being paid for by the brand itself, that's reporting and saying, this is a good job for X, Y, Z reasons. It's better than where I used to be. I'm able to invest in my own future and that of my family. And then on the environmental side, here's what they're doing to make sure that I'm experiencing environmental justice. So take Bangladesh, a lot of the cut sew happens there, but because the cut sew happens there on a garment, the dyeing also happens there because it's convenient. And these chemical dyes that I'm talking about, you scale that up and the chemicals are washing out into the water system. This is a negative environmental externality. And the very same people who are cutting and sewing those garments and not being paid enough to do it for a living wage for their families are also experiencing pollution in their waterways, and they're inhaling cotton during the day. It's a bad situation. So it really, to me, comes down to that direct contact with the workers in that supply chain, rather than some sort of like white collar professional association going to
Sure.
analyze and write reports about what they see.
Oh, that
Yeah,
makes sense. Go
yeah.
ahead, Kev.
Well, I'm just thinking about like, how we bridge the gap. Because I do remember like the sweatshop movement. Actually, I was at the time, living in Los Angeles, and my neighbor, I was working in the inner city communities, and my neighbor worked for Fredericks of Hollywood. She was a, Mexican immigrant, and she would sew shirts for Fredericks of Hollywood and other companies from her house all day. I mean, she was up at 6 o'clock at night. She fed her family at 6 o'clock, or she was up at 6 in the morning. She fed her family till 6 at night. Went back to work, and there was the constant hum of the sewing machine running, right? And she was getting like 3 cents a sleeve or whatever it was. You go to Fredericks of Hollywood, and it was like that shirt was like, $150 or something, right? And she was just cranking them out. But there was a movement at that time, but then it seems now that with Amazon or Temu or these kinds of things, that there's just you know people just buy so much stuff, and I would just
Yeah.
like to come back to like you had made this point about we kind of got people to like, do you need all that stuff? I think George Carlin had a really super funny stand-up comedy routine about like, you got all this stuff, and what do? You get another space for your stuff. So now you got two spaces for your stuff. Great. Now you can buy more stuff. And but how do we get out of that? Is the process like having the conversations with people in Bangladesh, being closer to the process of production and how things are made, so we care about them more? Like, how do we do that?
Well, yeah, I think the thing we really have going for us is that the things that you have to do in order to ensure sustainability and ethics of production are the same things that require you to consume less. You know what I'm saying? Because they cost more.
Yeah.
So there's only a certain amount of budget you have for promotional products. For that convention that you went to in San Diego, let's say they have $50,000 budget for promotional products. You can buy, uh, you know, 10,000 crap t-shirts made under suspect conditions with all kinds of polyester and pesticides involved in them, micro shedding of plastics, etc. But it's cheap. Or you can buy, half that amount or less of good stuff that's doing good things for the environment and workers. So you've made that decision. You're supporting businesses that care about workers and the planet, and you're producing less stuff at the same time. So I think that's the solution, is just getting people to adopt it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make sense, or is that too simple?
No, I mean, I think it makes sense that, I think it's not easy. I mean, I think it's part of it is, there's a mental shift that has to happen too. So where companies are promoting like, hey, we got our merchandise from Ethix merch, right? Like, and,
Right.
so that, a company's at a show and they're like, hey, we just want you to know our swag is ethically made, and so that it becomes the thing that you do. Like, I think B Corp has been pretty successful in doing some of that stuff, or people do go shop and they're like, you know what, I'm going to buy this. It's a couple little bit more money, but this is I feel good about it. I feel better about it than doing that. Everybody's not going to do that, but I think it does have to be a movement where we're like, yeah, we're going to make a good decision, not a bad one. The other thing it's funny I think about is that, like, I have a pair of my grandfather's, who's passed, but I have a pair of my grandfather's binoculars, and like they're so special to me, and like I want to hold on to these binoculars, like give them to my son. I want to pass them down, right? Like somebody was, they have all this meaning, but holding on to these things that last for a while are meaningful, and versus, or like you get a pair of sunglasses and versus 100 pair of crap sunglasses, and it's just waste. So I always think about like behavioral change, like what pushes things. But I think as humans, we can lean into things where like it's more special. No, I like it. It's more special. I don't need all that, crapola, like, 100 things.
Hmm.
But so
Yeah, I think you're right on target, Kevin. Like the problem is, I guess, if you're putting on a big conference or an event, how do you have the time? How do you create the time to find out what the stories are behind those products so that you can tell the stories to make them feel more special, you know?
yeah,
Because I agree, that's how you get more value out of it. If you have 1,000 shirts instead of 5,000, and you're only giving it to people who sign up in advance saying they want it, like I need another t-shirt, I would wear another t-shirt, so that reduces the number that you're giving away, but it has a great story behind it. You're going to get, 10 times the value of having your logo on that t-shirt than you would if you just like uniformly hand it out to everyone. They stuff it in the bottom of their tote bag, and they take it out 3 weeks later, and they're like, I don't need this,
yeah,
and it might just go straight to Goodwill, and then Goodwill is going to ship it all the way across the freaking country, the world. It's going to end up
Right.
back in
World.
Bangladesh where it started, messing with their local, economy, their garment economy. So
But you said something. You talked about their story. How cool would it be on the back of these T-shirts if it was subtly printed that you give the story of this T-shirt.
yeah,
This was responsibly made. You know what I mean? You list it out to say this isn't your daddy's T-shirt.
yeah,
And we want to thank XYZ Corp for investing in a better world. I mean, that would be a great thing to have on the back of the shirt because people like that, right? It matters.
yeah, for sure. And some of that stuff happens. Like Kevin, you mentioned
Mhm.
B Corp. B Corp is awesome in a lot of different ways. It's much better about certifying the practices of the business itself and its direct employees and its direct impact and like its scope one emissions, for example, than it is on the subcontracted situation. So when you get into apparel and you're trying to purchase something sustainable that's apparel and you see that the brand is B Corp certified, that doesn't necessarily mean that anyone has done any due diligence on that scope three, like tier three level of the supply chain. So it really does come down to details. And there's a danger here in storytelling. It goes back to greenwashing or blue washing on the labor side, is the people who are best at telling stories that are going to connect with people are also the same people who are biggest and have the most money for marketing and branding. And they can take a small environmental benefit and they can make it seem huge. Whereas a small business who, for example, is procuring from a worker-owned cooperative in Bangladesh that are paying their workers living wages, they might not be able to tell that story in as compelling a way. So, there's that problem as well.
yeah, it's true. But marketing,
Yeah.
marketing is a big
Yeah.
marketing
So
is a
it's
big
all up to you
problem.
guys, really.
Yeah, it is. Well, we're big. It's funny. I had this thought. I'll probably edit this out, but I had this thought. I was driving, and I was like, fuck marketing. Like marketing just fuck shit up. Like actually, like tell a good story. Like tell a story that's honest about like what's happening in this company or what this company is trying to do, because everything else is just competing for a narrative, you're competing for
Right.
attention. And
That's
there's
right.
so much. There's so many people out there competing. And so we're really big, Climate Hive, we're really big on stories. Why we do, doing these shows, because we actually think your story is important. We ordered, swag from your company because we think what you're doing is important, right? We're gonna, get that to our clients because we think it matters and it's important and it's marketing, but it's the story, and so how do we get away from, we're never going to perhaps get away from marketing, I don't know, but I was having that thought of like, I don't, somebody's going to come along and convince me that I need to be like everybody else or something, or I'm, missing out. And there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes on, and people study it. They study the psychology of how to influence people's behaviors, and they're good at it. And I think we need to be good at it too. Like, I think we need to be manipulative, but for the right reasons, and get people thinking about it. So I'll get off my soapbox, but
No, you're 100% right. And there's no shortcuts because our story is more complicated. So it's really about getting someone who's a decision maker to sit down with you and hear you out on the details of what's greenwashing and what's not, what makes a true impact for workers in the environment and what doesn't, and being completely open about when you don't know. Because sometimes you don't know, and that can help build trust too. Like when I have that conversation with Climate Town, and their second product after they did those sustainable t-shirts was hats. They're like, we really want hats. So I show them these awesome union made hats with organic cotton made in New Jersey. And they're like, that sounds really good. What's the bill made out of? And I'm like, never thought about it. Plastic. And they're like, do you have any hats without plastic? So yeah, I had to go on a big search. Eventually found a company called Rustec in Canada that makes hats with cork instead of plastic. So that's what they ended up going with. So it's having the time to sit down and have those generative conversations about where we're trying to get to, what are our values that we share, and how do we make every project, even if it's swag, live out our values.
I kept thinking about, Foxconn,
Yeah.
when they were having that problem with worker suicide, right? And their solution was they put nets outside the building. And that really bothered me, right? That's the solution, right? Because it had nothing to do with the problem, right?
Yeah.
But Foxconn's problem was Apple was really turning the screws on them because Apple was getting in trouble because those workers had such horrible lives that they were killing themselves. Right.
Yeah.
But rather than deal with that, they just wanted to take away the ability for them to do it. And I was bothered by that enormously,
Yeah, I
and
guess that's what we didn't get into. The one thing is that price component with your subcontractors. That's really the root of the problem. Like you could do
I,
as much monitoring of the system as you want, and you can have your subcontractors sign pristine codes of conduct indicating exactly the kind of treatment they're going to have for their workers and the kind of environmental protections they're going to have. But if your contract doesn't pay them enough to accomplish those things, they're never going to be able to do it, no matter how much you pressure them. And that's typically where the ESG breaks down. Is if you look at it logically, they're not being paid. These subcontractors aren't being paid enough to uphold the standards and values. And that's systemic because if they stop doing that, then they're going to lose out in their competition. And so it all goes back
right.
down to building a community of people who are willing to pay that extra price so that gets cover to the brand to say like, oh, you need us to pay you 15% more this year because you can't hit our code of conduct when it comes to like healthcare for our workers. That's going to edge up the price for the consumer, and we feel okay about that because we know that there's a movement of consumers that are going to back us up on that and pay that price if they know why. That community of ethical consumers doesn't exist yet. That's where it all has to start to unfold.
fantastic. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. It's just been a great conversation. I think we learned a lot and really look forward to continuing this conversation. It's really important.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bill. Appreciate it.